and for Donald Trump. Just 37% of Americans approve of the job Donald Trump is doing. In a highly respected new poll, the New York Times Siena poll, it's a 4-point drop since January. Another poll, CBS and YouGov, also has Donald Trump at 37%. A whopping 63% of Americans disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing. And it's not just a low for Donald Trump, right? That would seem obvious. It's a historic low for any president, at least compared to the last two. Nate Cohn from the New York Times puts these awful numbers for Trump in this perspective, writing, quote, while recent presidencies have often been unpopular and polarizing, no president's approval rating has been under 38% for more than a few days in the last 17 years. That's according to our average. If there has been a floor during this partisan era of politics, Trump's ratings today have fallen to it. And there's nothing here to suggest that Trump has hit the floor. Just 28% of Americans approve of his handling of the cost of living in that new New York Times poll. His handling of inflation is down at 27%. In the CBS YouGov poll, 65% of Americans in that poll say Trump's policies are making the economy worse in the short term. 77%, almost 80% of Americans say their incomes are not keeping up with inflation. As Americans are feeling the pain of Donald Trump's failures on the economy, something he ran on, they also see clearly and believe that he is using the presidency to benefit himself personally. A YouGov poll finds that almost 60% of Americans believe Trump is using his office for personal gain. It's not just bad political news, devastating political news for someone as vain as Donald Trump. It also looks bleak politically for his Republican enablers. The New York Times Siena poll shows that Democrats hold a whopping 11-point lead, 50% to 39%, when voters are asked which party they will support in congressional races. With signs that even his base has had enough of him, 37% of Republicans tell the New York Times that they want their party to go in a different direction than Trump. So just how frustrated Trump's base is remains to be seen. He's had some political wins in Indiana. We'll be focused in on that question tonight as Trump turns into a referendum issue, his brand of MAGA Republicanism. He's seeking to oust two Republican incumbents, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie and Texas Senator John Cornyn, in favor of diehard loyalists, Ed Galrein in Kentucky and scandal-ridden Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Joining our coverage, Democratic pollster and political analyst Cornell Belcher. Back with us, political analyst, former Senator Claire McCaskill, and former San Antonio mayor and housing secretary under President Obama, political analyst Julian Castro is here. Let me ask you, Julian, first, what's happening in Texas?
Well, today's announcement by Donald Trump that he's endorsing the Attorney General Ken Paxton in a runoff that'll happen a week from today against Senator John Cornyn. I mean, that really gives a leg up to Ken Paxton and has to be welcome news by James Tallarico. Polling has shown that Tallarico is very competitive, the Democrat, very competitive against both of them, but does a couple of points better against Ken Paxton. And you can understand why. This was a guy that a federal indictment hung over his head for years, got impeached, a whole bunch of baggage that makes him weak, especially in this cycle. And so the latest polling has Tallarico either tied or just ahead of Ken Paxton. And it has been that way ever since Tallarico won the primary in March. So this is big news. And it means that it's going to be a very competitive election in November here in Texas, the first time in a very long time.
And you hear that privately and publicly. I want to show all of you what the thing about Trump 2.0 is. It's all out loud. It's all on camera. Here he is talking about what his priorities are as president.
What do you think motivates him to do that?
Let me read this to you, Cornell. Trump says, quote, I'm doing a job on the reflecting lake. It's been renamed a lake. I'm not sure if that's like Gulf of America renaming or just a misstatement. I'm doing a job on the reflecting lake for a fraction of what they paid. Now I've upgraded it I got so into it. I've upgraded it like you wouldn't believe. I'm doing all the walkways outside. You know, I'm doing it. I'm doing it properly, but it is a much bigger job. But you see, it's happening now. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be waterproof. It's a reflecting pool. I hope so. It's going to be reflecting again. I took over a dirty, filthy thing that wasn't open, and it was disgusting. And friends of mine would come to the Lincoln or the Washington, and they would say, quote, sir, it's disgusting. I said, what's disgusting? The reflecting lake, the reflecting lake. It's very reflective. I put a thing out yesterday showing the reflection. We did a little test. We wanted to see. It's like a mirror. It's beautiful. That's a quote. I can't believe that he actually said that. That is the man with his hands on the nuclear code. That is also the man that 70% of Americans describe themselves as feeling either, quote, frustrated or angry about when it comes to his approach to the economy. This is a diligence that he never showed around COVID, that he hasn't communicated publicly when it comes to the war in Iran. But on the reflecting pool, it is a near obsession.
Well, he may very well be doing a great job on the reflecting pool. But the problem is they hire him as commander for the reflecting pool, which is why his poll numbers are so poorly. And let's dig into that a little bit more, Nicole, and why his approval numbers, disapproval numbers are important, or for any president that's important. If you go to the New York Times poll and you look at the approval, disapproval of the president, and then looking how the voters are breaking, that 11-point gap, that 11-point margin by Democrats, it's really important. I want to say something about that second. But first, so if you look at what's happening underneath there, Nicole, you have 70+% of voters who disapprove of Donald Trump supporting the Democrat candidate in the generic Democrat candidate. That's why the approval is important. Approval, disapproval is important. That's why you don't want your president or the leader of your party to have his or her, unfortunately always his in this country, his approval ratings that low, because you're getting 70% of those who disapprove are breaking for the opposition party, which puts them in a particularly problematic place. The 11-point gap, Nicole, is really important in polling because, look, back in 2005, 2006, when I was DNC's pollster for Chairman Dean, we gradually began to see 5-point, 4-point, 6-point, 8-point, then a 10-point gap. And we sort of saw this wave election coming. And to get a double digit, it's important for Democrats because historically, structurally, you needed at least a 10 or 11-point generic to see a wave election for Democrats structurally. Although, Nicole, I don't even know if that's true anymore because through their gerrymandering, through their hubris, sort of erasing of Democratic districts, and particularly African-American and Hispanic districts, I would argue, Nicole, that they have broken down their wall, their barrier for breaking up a wave election by making strong Republican districts less strongly Republican. So the 11-point gap now, I actually don't know what's possibly going to happen. I think Democrats could very well pick up more seats than they have historically with a 10 or 11-point gap because they've eroded away their breakwater.
Democrat of Massachusetts is joining me now and surveying all of this. What do you think about this fundamental dynamic that we now have of Trump's grip on the Republican Party, sort of arguably stronger even maybe than it's ever been, grip on the country weaker, and what that means for what happens?
So it's a tighter and tighter hold on a smaller and smaller group.
Yeah. Yes.
But that was really the point. I've heard the commentators say, and the people decided they didn't want to support Massey. No, the people who showed up at a Republican primary decided they didn't want him to be their standard bearer. If it's been an open, anybody votes. If this had been a general, I don't know exactly how that goes. But I think this is the part. It's interesting to watch and to watch what the dynamic will be on Republicans who say, man, I'm not crossing that guy, on the elected Republicans. We know who they belong to. But the reality is we're 5 months out. We're going to have a general election. And boy, that's going to start shaking things.
So there's a bunch of cross pressure. I mean, right now we're already seeing the fallout in the Senate today. Right? In a few different ways. I want to talk. One way was there was a war power resolution today. And for the first time, Democrats' party line, except for John Fetterman, have been voting for it. Republicans have been voting against it, except for Rand Paul. Those two have been switching. Today, Bill Cassidy, fresh off that loss on Saturday, crossed the line and voted with you and your colleagues to put it over the hump, which means it will now call a vote, is how I understand the procedure. What do you make of that development, and also what it portends for this Senate for the next 4 or 5 months?
Could you say more clearly that if I'd been voting my conscience all along, I would not have been voting with Donald Trump?
Talk about a confession. I mean, it's really wild.
It's just like a moment of just now we can see what's really going on. And so you look at all the other guys who are still voting in line with Donald Trump, who watch these election victories, and look, there's no voter who's going to be fooled after today, right? Is there anybody left who thinks that there is an elected Republican who is actually voting his conscience, doing what he thinks is best for all of the people of his district? How does he stand up in front of the electorate for the next 5.5 months as he faces the general electorate and say, you know what matters most to me? And with a straight face says, you, rather than pleasing Donald Trump.
Well, and I think there's a strange kind of coincidence of interest here, which is that both Donald Trump and I would argue the Democratic Party probably want it to be the case that voters understand that Donald Trump is the Republican Party and the Republican Party is Donald Trump. Well, I mean, at this point, right?
But that's reality. We'd like people to understand reality. But here's the thing. What Democrats will do now and are doing already is they are both going after Donald Trump. Remember, the man who said, what would he do? He would lower costs on day one. And where are we on costs? Cost of groceries is up, cost of gasoline is up, cost of healthcare is up, cost of utilities is up, cost of housing is up. And he told us he would keep us safe and stay out of wars. And you can do your own count on how many he's in, but what I know he's
might be
spending,
another one in Cuba, who knows?
That's right, $1 billion a day to kill people halfway around the world, and still can't explain how that helps one single family here in America. So we're going to stay on that, but here's the other half. We're also going to be making the affirmative case. And that's not just he sucks.
Right.
Our case is going to be, here are the things that we'll lay out that we will commit to get done that will affect your family, that will lower your costs. I think that's going to be the key.
I want to talk about that contrast, but I want to stay on for a second on the way that he is using taxpayer money and pushing that. I mean, because you've got this, I think this ballroom thing is really wild, right? I mean, originally it was, I'm raising private funds. Now it's, I must have $1 billion. He's monomaniacally obsessed with it. Over the weekend, the Senate parliamentarian, for somewhat complicated reasons, stripped out the ballroom funding out of the bill. They want to pass on a party line vote to begin with, right? They're not consulting you. There's no negotiation on this. And Trump is so obsessed with this. I mean, it's all he talks about, really. He did an event today about it. He calls up Thune, Senate Majority Leader, to basically say you should fire the parliamentarian. And he wants to get this through. But this just strikes me, I mean, when you're talking about this contrast of like what they stand for, like there's been $1 billion in the guy's ballroom as people's groceries, as all their costs explode. It is an opportunity to be like, well, here's what we would do with money.
Exactly. Right. Because that really is the heart of it. Donald Trump has now said, with the cameras running, now we can't do childcare. Right? We can't do that because we got this war to fight halfway around the world.
Yeah, he literally said that. That's not. I want to say that's not a gross mischaracterization.
That's right.
Explicitly,
he literally said it.
Yeah.
He spends hours, right, online doing memes about the war or about Donald Trump in a triumphal arch or in a made-up AI thing where he's floating in the reflecting pool. He spends hours on this. He spends energy on this. He talks about the ballroom. And where is he on your groceries? Where is he on the fact that your utilities are up 67%? Where is he on the ways that his own policies, his tariff policy, his energy policy, his healthcare policy, and his war have driven your costs up and up and up and up? And the answer is nobody home. Don't want to talk about it. Get mad if somebody raises it. He doesn't want to talk about it. But here's what we're betting on, that this is what elections are about.
Yeah.
And when we hit the general election, Democrats are going to say, I'm going to talk about this stuff.
He has been very focused on the ballroom. He is very focused on, I think, essentially enriching himself, his family, and his supporters.
Well, that's the other half.
Right.
He's also on making himself rich.
So I want to talk about this. I have you here. I mean, I have to say, this, to call it a settlement is too charitable and generous. It's a shakedown. It's not even a court-approved settlement in a technical sense, right? I mean, they're calling it that, but we've got a $1.8 billion slush fund that's going to be given out by essentially his appointees at will to whoever. Attached to it today, on top of that, is someone who's spent a lot of time thinking about tax fairness and particularly the tax incidence of the wealthiest and most connected Americans. A crazy writer that came out today that basically says they dropping all audits, can never investigate him or his companies or his family or anyone ever for anything. The IRS. I guess I'm left speechless. It sort of melted my ability to analyze it. What is your response to it?
But you've got it exactly right. So start on the first part of it, and this is this $1.8 billion. Can we just underline here? That's not some random $1.8 billion. It's not $1.8 billion that fell out of the sky. This is taxpayer dollars. This is stand up in front of a group of people and say your money dig in your pockets. Your money. That's exactly right. Didn't go to lowering the cost of health care. It didn't go to child care. It didn't go to bringing down your costs or even paving a road out here. It went to Donald Trump to distribute, I don't know, to people who beat up cops on January 6th. It goes to whoever Donald Trump's favorite person of the hour is. Nobody gets ruled out here, no matter what kind of crook you are. So that's the first part, is the money part.
I mean, we should just say it's essentially explicitly a fund for crooks in some sense, because which is not to say that everyone's prosecutor is a crook. I want to be very clear about that. But I mean, it's really pointing in that direction, just to be clear. Yeah.
Pointing pretty sharply,
yes, right.
As in finger right at your nose. Yeah, okay. But look at what happens in the other part of what he's done. I don't know how else you could hold up a bigger sign that says the President of the United States is deeply concerned that he has committed tax fraud, members of his family have committed tax fraud over a long period of time. And as soon as somebody other than Donald Trump is in charge, those chickens are going to come home to roost and poop all over him. And so
then he says, insist on this as the settlement writer.
That's right. This is the settlement writer right this minute. And by the way, it almost has, you said you can't analyze it from me. It has just a little bit of the flavor of, the general election is coming up. And if Democrats are there in the House and the Senate and have some control, they might be doing hearings, putting brakes. They may be reining in. So it's like watching somebody who's been gorging on corruption, who is loaded with corruption and says, let's stuff in a few more pieces before the guys come who might take the food away from the table.
On the sort of corruption priorities and cost question, which I agree is like the center right now of the campaign. It's like the guy wants to build a ballroom, wants to pay off his friends. Are you better off? You're not. Things are more expensive. His own war. He started all this. It's not like, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and costs went up. Joe Biden took the blame, but was not a lot he could have done about it. This is a very different situation. But there also is a question of like tangibly, it's like even if you have Senate majorities, there's not a Senate majority, House majority, like how much you can actually do to bring down costs for folks.
I don't see it that way. So I see what we can start with is we can do the investigations and start beating back on the corruption. And let's not forget on this, the corruption and the costs are not running independently. They're actually feeding each other.
Correct.
Why are your utility bills so high? Well, could part of it be that Donald Trump took $1 billion from the oil industry and keeps delivering on that? So every place where we've got oversight capacity independently to call people in, to cut off budgets, to demand from the various actors, may not be Donald Trump himself, but from the people who are running the administration, it gives us a purchase. It gives us a foot in the door to be able to push back on that. Second thing is look where we are right now. Donald Trump and the Republicans have nothing to show for having been in power for a year and a half. They're going to have to turn around and run on, hi, here's what we did, a ballroom. That isn't finished, and a reflecting pool that looks like a Holiday Inn swimming pool.
The Estate Act tax exemption is nice and big, I will say.
Tax breaks for billionaires, for Meta, for the big guys. Okay, that's what they've got to run on. One of the things we will be in a position to do if we have House and Senate is start pushing through our agenda, push through our child care bill, and now it's up to Donald Trump. What are you going to do, baby? You're going to veto it because it came from the Democrats, or you're going to pony up and sign it and reduce costs for American families. So don't tell me that we're going to be handcuffed until 2028. Nope. The fight starts the day after the election if we've got the power.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, thank you for making time and for being patient as we work through this busy.